Well, I am not a runner. I participated in this Matrix Pregnancy Resource Center Hero Run. I participated in the thing. I'm not a runner, but for 29 and a half minutes yesterday, I pretended to be. And I need a little bit of encouragement from you all because I ran a 5K for the first time in my life. Yeah, and I made it all the way without walking at all. Yeah. I tell you what, on Friday night, I stayed up late Friday night because I was trying to figure out some way of getting myself psyched up mentally for this whole process the next morning that I knew I was going to be torturing my body with. And I even posted to Facebook that I was worried about the whole experience, and people were writing back that they were going to take pictures of me collapsed on the ground. And, you know, it was one of these sort of emotionally trying times when everybody around me thought that I was not going to make it, and so neither did I. And so what I did is I made a playlist for myself on Friday night in my iTunes. I figured out the beats per minute of all my songs. I went to running websites and found out how many beats per minute you needed for which pace. And I knew on my treadmill I could survive at 5 miles an hour. So what I decided is I was going to look for that. So I set up all these, in case you want to know, it's 130 beats per minute. So if you're doing any research, 130 beats a minute is supposed to be 5 miles an hour jogging or running or something. So anyway, I get onto my iTunes and I set up 3 songs that have 130 beats per minute. And then the 4th song, you know what I put in there? It was a 110 beats per minute song by U2 called Walk On. Yeah. And so here I am, I'm doing U2's Beautiful Day early at the very beginning. I did like some Coldplay, Viva La Vida, because, you know, I was experiencing life at the beginning. And then the 4th song was Walk On. And so my strategy was I get to walk on, and then I get to walk on. And so I was going to walk for like 2 songs and then jog for another one. And I had the whole thing planned out. And then I got to that song yesterday, and I was like, I'm really not dead yet. So maybe I'll just keep going. And eventually I just kept going, and I made it all the way through all 5K without actually collapsing at all. And I'm standing in front of you today without a whole ton of muscle soreness. It hurts, trust me, but it's not a ton. And so I'm pretty proud of myself. Because I'll say this. I'm not a runner. I just pretended to be for a day. And I may actually start doing some running, but there's one thing that runners experience that I don't think I will ever experience. In fact, I can probably guarantee to all of you in this room that I will never experience this thing. It happens around mile 20. And it's called bonking or hitting the wall. I'm never going to be there. I'm never going to make it that far. And so I am never going to experience that. I'm telling you right now, I don't ever want to experience it, so I'm just simply not going to go there. But I have this metaphor in my head of hitting the wall. I know a little bit about it. A couple years ago, I was talking to a marathoner. One of my next door neighbors is a marathoner. And then we had a guy in our church who ran the Boston Marathon a couple years back in 2 hours and 45 minutes. And he was bummed because he was shooting for 2:40. And so, I mean, crazy people, I know. So anyway, I'm meeting some of these guys, and I'm talking to them about this wall thing because I was fascinated by it. And this last week, I did some research to refresh my mind of how it all works. And, you know, I was talking to Lee yesterday about the whole glycogen fat burn balance that goes on in your muscles, and I did some more research, and I found this out. Check this out. The wall happens because you have about 2,000 glycogen calories that your body can store, maximum, in its muscles. Glycogen is the food that your muscles use to do their nyet thing. And so you can store about 2,000 calories of glycogen in your muscles, in your body. And of course, that's if you're really well trained. For people like me, I can probably store about 1,000 because my muscles don't know what to do with all that extra fuel. It just says, hey, let's make fat. That's good. So anyway, the real runners, they can store about 2,000. So here's the deal, though. When you're jogging, when you're running, you burn about 100 calories of glycogen per mile. So after 20 miles, guess what's happening? You got no more. It's gone. All the glycogen in your body is completely burned up. And then a whole bunch of stuff happens at that moment in time. Now, the smart runners have been eating something as they've been running. Science and technology has incredibly produced like these drinks and gels and whatnot that runners are doing now. So fewer and fewer runners are hitting the wall these days just because of modern technology. But this is what happens if you get to that place. 20 miles in, your glycogen store is done. Guess what happens? Well, your body begins to burn the sugar that it can find anywhere. And some of that's in your bloodstream, some of that's in your liver. And when your muscles begin to steal sugar from your brain, guess what your brain does? Oh, wow. That's a pretty rock over there. I bet that would be so comfortable to lie down on. Your brain does weird things. I've heard of people hallucinating. There's this one ultramarathoner type dude who he does marathons in like 2 hours and 30 minutes, something like that. And he was telling about glycogen depletion that he encountered once, and he saw little blue, purple people like Smurfs running on the road along with him, like helping him out, like cheering him on and stuff. And I'm like, I don't want to know what that really was. But so I found this quotation on how stuff works for this whole glycogen depletion thing. It says this: your brain's sole fuel is glycogen. Without it, your concentration fades. Glycogen depletion also causes your body to produce serotonin, which can make you feel tired. To make matters worse, the feel-good chemical dopamine, responsible for excitement and motivation, drops. It's a perfect storm of mental and emotional trouble. Not the least of which is the problem that your muscles have no energy to burn either. And so I saw this YouTube video just even last night of this guy in Amsterdam who was running a marathon 200 meters from the end of the race. I mean, the finish line is in front of him. Everybody is standing next to him, cheering him. 200 meters, and he does this. And just stood motionless in the middle of the track while about 100 people passed him for the next 5 minutes. He took like a step and then would just stand there. Couldn't go any further. 200 meters from the finish line. All brain power is gone. All muscle power is gone. You've hit the wall. I'm never going to get there. I have no intention of ever reaching such a landmark moment. So, I still think that I've hit the wall before. I remember there was a time in a relationship that I had where you could tell the relationship was beginning to slide towards that distance place, where you're still pretending to be friends with each other. And this wasn't like a dating relationship. This was just a friend. But you could tell that relationship was growing farther and farther apart. We were growing farther and farther apart. And I started trying to work to bring it back together, to try to maintain this friendship. And we did breakfasts, and we did lunches, and we had long conversations on the phone. And we played racquetball, and out of all of this effort, still it didn't work. I hit the wall, the friendship died, the other person left my life, and it was like, what in the world is going on there? And maybe you've experienced the same kind of thing. I know for a fact that every one of us in this room has either at some point in our time so far experienced a wall, or we will experience a wall. Maybe your wall has been a spiritual wall. You prayed and prayed and prayed for years and heard no response. You came to church for a long period of time. You read your Bible cover to cover, and by the time you finished, you asked this question: what did it mean? What difference did it make? Maybe you're going through that period right now, and maybe you're actually trying to rekindle things by just showing up here this morning, and you're like, if I can just go to one more Sunday, maybe I can break through that wall. Maybe for you it's relationship, and you had one of those relationships where you tried your best to keep it going, but it hit the wall and died. Maybe for you it was something financial. You put some money somewhere, and it just went nowhere. I'm sure that all of us have had some moment where you would say, I hit the wall. And we're going to find in the book of Daniel, chapter 10, a moment when Daniel himself hit a wall. When his perfect storm of emotional and mental whatever happened, and he was at his lowest point. We find him a number of times in this chapter with his face on the ground because he just can't go any further. So I want to ask you the question, what about you when you hit the wall? What do you do? We're in this series called Into the Fire. And the reason we're doing this series through the book of Daniel is that we see Daniel regularly has these decisions he needs to make. And you and I have decisions that we need to make. And those decisions always come in this kind of fashion where one direction takes us closer to God's will for our lives, another direction takes us further from God's will for our lives. And the direction that takes us closer to God's will, as we look down that path, we usually see places of discomfort. And as we look down this other path, we see places of comfort. And so going down God's path for us is something that we say, hey, there's difficulty there, but then going down my path, there's comfort there. And we don't see that on the other side of those things, it all flips. If I go down God's path, I walk into a place of fire, discomfort, but He takes me to a place of joy and peace on the other side. And if I walk into a place of apparent ease and comfort, picking my own path, on the other side of that, we eventually reach a place where we find God actually testing us, judging us, and maybe even we find some pretty bad fire down that path. And so that's the lesson that we've been learning. We see it time and time again in Daniel, and over all of it, and this is one more time we need to keep this thing in mind, over all of it we learn this phrase. You've probably memorized it by now, I hope. No matter what it looks like, God is in charge. And then last week in chapter 9, we added one extra phrase because Daniel learned an extra piece. And that extra piece he learned was, and he has a plan for his people. No matter what it looks like, God is in charge and He has a plan for His people. So when we come to this passage, we see Daniel hitting the wall, and all of that belief gets tested. Is God really in charge? Does He really have a plan? Let's see what happens. Daniel chapter 10, here's the setup, verses 1 through 3. It's on page 622 of the Bibles we passed out, and it says this: In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a revelation was given to Daniel, who was called Belteshazzar. Its message was true, and it concerned a great war. The understanding of the message came to him in a vision. At that time, I, Daniel, mourned for 3 weeks. I ate no choice food, no meat or wine touched my lips, and I used no lotions at all until the 3 weeks were over. Now, here's the context. He says it's the 3rd year of Cyrus. We've already seen some kings change in the land of Babylon. And we've already talked about how Cyrus was actually the real king when this other guy named Darius worked as king in Babylon. So Darius was kind of the king of Babylon, but Cyrus was the real king over the entire Persian Empire. And so this Darius guy, he eventually leaves the scene. He dies or something happens. And then Cyrus takes over Persia too directly. And so now Cyrus is in charge of Persia, and it's been 3 years since Cyrus got in charge of Babylon also. So let's just set up the dates for you. Based on our best understanding of history, this is about 535 BC. Now Daniel was taken to Babylon in 605 BC. Do all the math. Daniel was probably in his late teens or 20s when he was taken to Babylon, and we find him now in 80 to 90 territory. Daniel is likely 90 years old at this point in time, and he has seen a lot of God's work in his life. Daniel's experienced a great amount of God's work in his life. Just remind yourself of where he's been. In chapter 2, Daniel hears that the king had a dream, but the king won't tell him what the dream is. And so Daniel goes and he talks to his friends, and the 4 of them, that night, they spend time in prayer, and that night God reveals to them the dream and its meaning. Just a couple chapters later in Daniel chapter 4, the king has another dream, and he says it to Daniel. Daniel doesn't even need to go off to the side and pray. He just is troubled in his heart because he knows immediately what it means, and then he tells the dream's meaning to the king. And it just happened immediately. Daniel chapter 5. In Daniel chapter 5, he sees the writing on the wall, literally. A hand had written a message on a wall, supernaturally. He sees the writing on the wall, and he instantly knows the meaning of the writing on the wall. Daniel chapter 7 and 8, he gets this incredible vision of beasts coming out of the waters, and he's so disturbed by it that he goes up to a nearby angel, taps that angel on the shoulder and says, "Hey, can you explain this to me?" And the angel says, "Okay, sure." And he explains to him the meaning right then and there. Daniel chapter 9, he reads the Old Testament. He reads the book of Jeremiah, a letter, a section from Jeremiah, and he gets inspired about something Jeremiah has written. And so he immediately turns to prayer, and God interrupts his prayer to bring him the message and the explanation. This is how Daniel's life with God has worked. I have a need. I go to God in prayer. The answer comes almost immediately until chapter 10. And in chapter 10, he gets a revelation. It's got a true message concerning a great war, but the understanding doesn't come until a vision. And that vision happens in chapter 10, chapter 11, and chapter 12. But before the vision shows up, we get verses 2 and 3. I mourned for 3 weeks. I let no choice food enter my mouth. I didn't even use any lotions. What that means? That's deodorant. He's like, 3 weeks. Here it is. His whole life with God has been like this. I have a need. I come to God. God meets the need. I have a problem. I come to God, and he shows up. I have hardship. I go to God. He shows up and brings me to a place of blessing on the other side of this hardship. Yes, Daniel's experienced a lot of hardship, but God keeps showing up immediately. Daniel's friends get thrown into a fiery furnace, and God doesn't wait 4 hours to show up. He's there right then. Daniel gets thrown into a lion's den, and God doesn't wait a couple days. He shows up right then. And here Daniel has a revelation from God, a huge revelation from God about a great war. And he says, all right, God, bring me the answer. He goes to prayer. Nothing. He fasts. Nothing. He gives up deodorant. Nothing. What do I have to do, God? 3 weeks of silence. And then it seems like he gives up. Because the next verse, he's not even in Babylon anymore. The next verse, in verse 4, we find out he's on the bank of the great river Tigris. He's in a completely different part of the country. Who knows how long it actually took him before he got this answer? He hit the wall. Now, when you hit the wall, you're going to be tempted to doubt the lesson of Daniel. The lesson of Daniel is that God is in charge and he's got a plan for his people. But when you hit the wall, you're going to be tempted to doubt that lesson. And so there are going to be 2 specific ways you will be tempted to doubt. Number 1, you will doubt whether or not God is in charge, and you will doubt that he cares. That's how you're going to be tempted. When you hit the wall, you're going to be tempted to doubt either that God is in charge or that he cares. I imagine Daniel was in a similar place. He doesn't admit it. He doesn't tell us how he's feeling about that. But as I imagine what he'd be going through, he would probably be in that place. Now, here's the amazing thing. God does give Daniel an answer in chapter 10. And the answer is more astonishing than anything we've seen in the book of Daniel so far. I mean, it'll knock your socks off. It's been hard for me to even get through portions of this message just because it's affecting me. This is a crazy, astonishing thing that happens to him. And on top of it, it doesn't answer his question. He wants to know the meaning of the vision. He wants to know the meaning of this revelation that he's gotten. And guess what? He doesn't get it until chapter 11 and chapter 12. And so we're not going to see it until next week. But what happens is Daniel receives a vision from God that is what he needs, even though it's not what he wants. It's what he needs at this moment because he's going to be tempted to doubt that God is in charge or that God cares. And God shows up to give him such an amazing answer to that need. Let's keep reading. Daniel chapter 10, we're going to read verses 4 all the way through the first verse of 11. On the 24th day of the first month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, the Tigris, I looked up, and there before me was a man dressed in linen, with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like topaz, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and his voice like the sound of a multitude. I, Daniel, was the only one who saw the vision. Those who were with me did not see it, but such terror overwhelmed them that they fled and hid themselves. So I was left alone, gazing at this great vision. I had no strength left. My face turned deathly pale, and I was helpless. Then I heard him speaking, and as I listened to him, I fell into a deep sleep, my face to the ground. A hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. He said, Daniel, you who are highly esteemed, consider carefully the words I'm about to speak to you and stand up. For I've now been sent to you. And when he said this to me, I stood up trembling. Then he continued, do not be afraid, Daniel, since the first day that you set your minds to gain understanding and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I've come in response to them. But the prince of the Persian kingdom resisted me 21 days. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me because I was detained there with the king of Persia. Now I've come to explain to you what will happen to your people in the future, for the vision concerns a time yet to come. While he was saying this to me, I bowed with my face towards the ground and was speechless. Then one who looked like a man touched my lips, and I opened my mouth and began to speak. I said to the one standing before me, I'm overcome with anguish because of the vision, my Lord, and I feel very weak. How can I, your servant, talk with you, my Lord? My strength is gone, and I can hardly breathe. Again, the one who looked like a man touched me and gave me strength. Do not be afraid, you who are highly esteemed, he said. Peace, be strong. Now, be strong. When he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, speak, my Lord, since you've given me strength. So he said, do you know why I've come to you? Soon I will return to fight against the prince of Persia, and when I go, the prince of Greece will come. But first I will tell you what is written in the book of truth. No one supports me against them except Michael, your prince. And in the first year of Darius the Mede, I took my stand to support and protect him. It's not the answer Daniel wanted. In fact, in the middle of the answer, he finds himself even more despairing. In the middle of the answer, he finds himself lying on the ground with his face there, and he can't even get up. And you see this imagery of Daniel. He's lying on the ground face down, and then he gets a touch, and he gets up on his hands and knees, and then he gets a word, a voice, and then he stands up, and then he gets another touch, and he speaks, and then he gets another touch, and now he's strong enough to actually get this vision. He's actually able to receive this vision. But that's not what Daniel wanted. Daniel didn't want all that. He just wanted the information. He just wanted the details. That's the whole reason he was praying for 3 weeks and just got silence and nothing. And now the person shows up. This glorious, amazing individual shows up, and it's the answer he needs, but not the answer he wants. And in order for us to find out what this answer really is and why it is that he needs it so much, we have to ask 3 questions. And those 3 questions that we ask of this text are, who is this spiritual man? Secondly, we need to ask the question, how does this man relate to Daniel? And then finally, we can ask the question, why did it take him so long to get there? The first question, who is this spiritual man? Now, we've seen angels in the book of Daniel so far. When he was seeing the vision of the Ancient of Days sitting on the throne, he saw all these angelic beings surrounding him, surrounding the Ancient of Days. And Daniel went up to one of the angels, tapped him on the shoulder, and was able to ask him a question. He gave him an answer. Then later on, Daniel meets another couple angels, and one of them gets a name. His name is Gabriel. And then after that, he gets another vision just a couple years later. And when Gabriel shows up, Daniel recognizes him. He's like, hey, that's the same guy I saw before. His name's Gabriel. Daniel's like on first name basis with some of the angels. That's just nuts. So here he is. He knows Gabriel. Gabriel's the same angel who speaks to Mary in the book of Luke when he's telling Mary she's going to have a baby and they're going to name him Jesus. And so Gabriel's this angel who gets to give information, and Daniel knows him. He's my buddy. We're on a first name basis. So he knows Gabriel. Later on in this passage, this spiritual being, this glorious spiritual being, speaks to Daniel and tells Daniel about another angel named Michael. So we've got this angel named Michael. We've got an angel named Gabriel. We also got an angel or something called the Prince of Persia. And we've got another one called the Prince of Greece. We've heard about these kind of spiritual, angelic kinds of beings. But Daniel doesn't recognize this being, except that it looks like a man. He doesn't recognize this being as Gabriel. It's certainly not Michael, because he's talking about Michael. And this angelic being, of whatever it is, seems way more elaborately described than anything else we've seen so far. In fact, if you take a look, you get this bright, brilliant image in your mind of what this angelic type of being is looking like. He's got a gold sash or belt, something around his middle. He's wearing some type of white linen robe. A robe in those days might have come all the way down to the ground. He's wearing this white robe with a bright gold belt. His face is all glowing. It's like topaz, the translation here has. Some translations have chrysolite, which actually, chrysolite is the chemical behind the world's most expensive natural gemstone, alexandrite. It's red in regular sunlight, it's green in sunlight, and it's red in indoor light. So depending on where you're standing, the gemstone changes color. It's an amazing gemstone, and naturally they're incredibly rare. But chrysolite is this gemstone that's one of the hardest gemstones. It's like the third or fourth hardest gemstone in all, and it's got this pale greenish, yellowish hue. And so whether it's topaz or chrysolite or whatever we should translate this as, he sees this individual and his face is like glowing. His body is like yellow. His legs are like bronze that's been highly polished. His eyes have flame coming out of them, and his face is glowing so brightly it's like lightning. And on top of all that, his voice is like a multitude. That's like going to Lucas Oil Stadium and hearing the entire crowd going, defense, defense. Because, if I were there, that's what I'd be yelling. Because they need some defense. But anyway, I'm just saying. So it's like hearing the entire crowd yelling something at one time. That's the voice of this angelic being that he sees. Way more glorious than anything Daniel has seen before. So whoever Michael is and whoever Gabriel is, this dude beats him. This dude is way more glorious than all of them. Would it surprise you to know that this isn't the only time he shows up in the Bible? This same being shows up a couple hundred years later in the book of Revelation. He makes an appearance to John in a very similar way. In fact, I want to read that passage to you and show you what it says in Revelation chapter 1, beginning in verse 12, running to verse 19. It says this. John is getting these visions. It's just at the beginning of John's visions, and he says this, I turned around to see the voice that was speaking to me. And when I turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands, and among the lampstands was someone like a son of man, dressed in a robe, reaching down to his feet, and with a golden sash around his chest. The hair on his head was white like wool, as white as snow, and his eyes were like blazing fire. His feet were like bronze glowing in a furnace, and his voice was like the sound of rushing waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars, and coming out of his mouth was a sharp, double-edged sword. His face was like the sun shining in all its brilliance. When I saw him, I fell at his feet as though dead. Then he placed his right hand on me and said, do not be afraid. I'm the first and the last. I'm the living one. I was dead, and now look, I'm alive forever and ever. And I hold the keys of death and Hades. Write therefore what you've seen, what is now, and what will take place later. John sees a vision of one who's wearing a robe, has a gold sash. His eyes have fire. His face is bright like the sun or like lightning. His body is like bronze, gleaming and glowing, kind of a goldish hue. And that person says, I was dead, and now I'm alive. Daniel met Jesus. Daniel met Jesus. Either that, or Jesus is wearing the same costume as some angel who met Daniel in the Old Testament for some reason that Jesus wants to look like some other angel. I don't think so. Daniel met the same individual that John met. Daniel met Jesus. We get a glimpse here of what Jesus looks like when he's not wearing earthly flesh. You see, he existed long before. Out of his own mouth, he said, before Abraham was, I am, to say he's always been. That's just who he is. God the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, they're all God, they're all equal, they're all eternal, they've all been around for a whole lot longer than any of us can imagine. That's what eternity is. And here he is showing up before he's ever worn human flesh, and yet he's meeting Daniel. And John and Daniel have the same reaction. They both fall flat on their faces. They're both nearly dead. They're both like, just down, just faint away. That's just what it is. Because you can't meet this glorious individual and be like, Jesus, you my buddy. Come on, man, let's go watch some games or something. You don't do that with Jesus if you see him like this. He's like causing you to be death on the ground. Because that's how glorious he is. That's how astounding he is. That goes far and above anything Daniel has actually seen face to face so far in this book. And so here's the point. When you hit the wall, open up your eyes, because you're about to get a new encounter with God. When you hit the wall, open your eyes to a new encounter with God. God just might break into your world in a way that goes way beyond anything you've ever thought of before. Because he's in charge. And he has a plan for his people. 21 days of nothing. Who knows how long total of silence? 21 days of fasting. And yet at the end of that whole process, after Daniel had hit his wall, after it seems like he'd even given up on the fasting thing, God shows up. And shows up in a more profound way than we have seen anywhere else in the book of Daniel. You might just get a new encounter with God. But the second question is, how does this glorious being relate to Daniel? We've already talked about it. There's Daniel lying on the ground and he touches him. There's Daniel on his hands and his knees and he speaks to him. There's Daniel standing up and he speaks to him and says, Daniel, you are highly esteemed. Then Daniel bows down and he can't even talk, and so he touches his mouth, and Daniel says, I can't talk to you. I'm too weak. And so a hand touches his shoulder and says, be strong, and he's strengthened. You see what's going on there? We're talking a moment of precious tenderness and patience. You know, my picture of, sometimes this is the way I view God. I'm sort of down in the dumps, and God like sort of walks by, and he hits me on the back and says, come on, man, get it together, let's go. And I'm like, okay, let's get it together, and gotta go. And here's Jesus standing next to Daniel, who's totally wiped out. He hasn't been eating for very well at all. He's exhausted physically, mentally, spiritually, in all kinds of ways. He is totally wiped out, and here's Jesus just, okay, I'll touch you one more. Okay, I'll say one more encouraging word to you. Okay, I'll lift you up just a little bit farther. I'll touch you again just once more. I'll say be strong. I'll lift you up. Jesus is just there until Daniel is strong enough to hear what he needs to hear. And Jesus isn't like, come on, Daniel. I've already touched you once. That's all you get. Come on, get up. Let's go. Let's go. I got something to tell you. He's just patient and he's just tender. When you hit the wall, you have got to know that the God who loves you is tender with you. When you hit the wall, trust his tenderness. But that doesn't answer this final question. Why did it take him so long to get there? Now, if this question, it all depends on who you figure out that person is. Because see, if the super glorious individual that Daniel meets is just an angel, then the rest of this account we can sort of write off. Because the rest of this account goes like this. Even though there's some super glorious angel who surpasses Michael and surpasses Gabriel as these two other angels, he's one of the warrior angels. You know, he's fighting against the Prince of Persia, and he and the Prince of Persia are engaged in this sort of wrestling match with each other. And it took them 21 days before Michael came in and did the tag team deal, so then this one dude that we're looking at can get away to talk to Daniel to give him a message, but he's going to go back and rejoin Michael so that they can put the beat down on this Prince of Persia guy. And so what we're seeing is we're viewing sort of like a heavenly or a spiritual wrestling match. And you get the impression that here's these angels and they're struggling with these demons, and it's just a fight. It's just some type of spiritual warfare thing going on, and they're fighting, and they're equally matched, and hopefully our side wins. You know, if it's just an angel, we can write off the delay by saying, well, you know what? Sometimes angels face demons, and that's kind of hard, and it works that way. But eventually he made it. Eventually he came. Yay, angel, go for it. But if it's Jesus, it changes the question entirely. Because if it's Jesus, now we see a picture of Jesus wrestling with a demon. This prince of Persia who's opposing him. We see Jesus wrestling with some evil force for 21 days, and he's not getting away from it. And we ask the question, is Jesus strong enough? Is he really in charge? Because that's how we feel about it when we hit the wall. That's how we feel about it. We say, maybe he's not in charge. Maybe he's not really strong. Maybe he doesn't really care. Maybe he can't really get the job done for me. That's the way we begin to feel. And amazingly enough, that's what Jesus tells us. For 21 days, he's detained by the prince of Persia. And it changes our entire notion of what we think about God. Except, there's this other verse in there. Verse 20. In verse 20, this incredible individual Daniel is looking at says this, do you know why I've come to you? Soon I will return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I go, the prince of Greece will come. Do you see what happened there? Michael's fighting with the prince of Persia right now. And this glorious individual is going back to the battle. And when he gets back there, the prince of Greece will come. What happened to the prince of Persia? His defeat takes place in the span of 3 very short words. When I go. I'm going to go back to the fight. And when I go, the prince of Greece will come. See, this Jesus is telling us he just needs to decide, and the enemy is done. That's all he's got to do. He just needs to choose, and the enemy is defeated. He just needs to go into it, and the battle is won. We're not even told about the battle at that point. It's just when I go. He's done. A couple things I want you to jot down here. Number 1, the heavenly struggle is real. Heavenly struggle is real. We get in this passage a picture of angels and demons in battle with each other. And it's told to us as a great heavenly war that's real and is going on. And so you really have, check this out. These angels have names, they have positions, they have authorities. You've got a prince over Persia, and apparently the reason the Persian government still exists is because the prince of Persia is still there. And apparently the reason that Greece ends up taking over the ancient world is because there's a prince who's allowed to come in and take over. And so apparently these angelic and demonic forces have political influence in the real world. It's real. But you know something else? And this is crazy. Nowhere in there does Jesus ever say to Daniel, listen, Daniel, it would have been so much better if you had just not eaten any meat at all. You said you didn't eat any choice food, but you still ate something. Daniel, you should have been fasting all the way, because if you were fasting all the way, I'd have been able to deal with the prince of Persia a little quicker. I'd have been able to make it here a little bit faster. 21 days, Daniel, I was detained. You weren't praying right. What you need to do is you need to say, in the name of Jesus, I bind the prince of Persia. And I just declare over that area victory. That's what you needed to do, Daniel. You should have prayed this special type of prayer in this special type of way, using these special type of words with a special level of intensity. No, he doesn't say that. He doesn't say that anyone did anything wrong. He doesn't say that anyone needs to do anything more. All he says is, Michael, your prince, the angel assigned to the nation of Israel, is my ally. And he's waging a war right now against some spiritually forces. But when I go, that battle will be won. See, here's the thing. The heavenly struggle is real, but Jesus is taking care of it. Jesus is taking care of it. He doesn't ask Daniel to get involved. Even in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul says this in Ephesians. He says, our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but it's against the powers and the rulers and the authorities in this dark world and against the forces of wickedness in heavenly realms. Paul says that, but then you know what he says after it? He says, so put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. And what is the full armor of God? It's the stuff that should be true in your life anyway. It's faith and being saved and having a sense of peace about your life and knowing the truth. That's what the armor of God is. That's what the armor of God is. It's not like some type of special voodoo that you need to do to enter into the spiritual war, because then Paul says at the very end of it, put on that full armor of God so that you can pray. And pray in the Spirit on all kinds of occasions. Why? Because we need to enter into this battle, because God needs our prayer support, because our prayer is like little bombs that shoot on into the Prince of Persia area to weaken him so that Jesus can finally get the job done. No, pray, it says, for the saints, because saints need strength, because people who follow God need strength. Because when you hit the wall, someone's got to touch your shoulder and say, be strong. That's what you pray for. That's what spiritual warfare is all about. Trying to pray for the people who are trying to follow God so that they can have the strength to continue just being the people God called them to do. The heavenly struggle is real, but Jesus is taking care of that. That brings us to the second issue, though. Because if when I go is all it takes, why 21 days? You get a picture of Jesus wrestling with this demonic force for 21 days, and he says, I was detained by them. What's that all about? You know what? There's only one word to answer that. Grace. Can you imagine the amazing thing that goes inside of Jesus when he says, you're a demon, and I can defeat you with a snap of my finger, but you are in charge of the nation of Persia for this period of time, and I'm letting you. I don't understand grace, but it works like this. Here's the blank you need to fill in. Jesus lets it happen. This spiritual struggle only lasts as long as Jesus lets it happen. And it seems to be grace. I don't understand God's grace. I don't understand God's grace to you or to me. I don't know why he lets you get away with the stuff he lets you get away with. I don't know why he doesn't punish me for the stupid things I've done. I don't understand grace. I much less understand the fact that God has the ability to apply grace even to demonic forces, allowing them to do the stupid things that they're doing in this world and in the spiritual world for a period of time, because he's got some type of plan. And he's willing to let that happen. And the grace he shows you and me to not punish us for what our sins deserve, he's applying that same grace in the cosmic level, where he's wrestling with a demon for 21 days that he can snap his fingers and be done with. I don't understand it, but I love it. The grace that God has is so beyond me. And I complain all the time. I'm like, God, why are you taking so long? Why don't you meet me on my terms at my time? And yet, he's just waiting around for some new opportunity for a new encounter, to demonstrate his tenderness to me and to prove that his timing is really all right. So when you hit the wall, trust his gracious timing. He's doing something. He's doing something. Trust God's gracious timing, because no matter what it looks like, he's in charge and he has a plan for his people. I don't know what you might be facing this week, but I just want to leave you with this. When you hit the wall, God is still in charge. Trust his gracious timing. Trust his tenderness. And open your eyes to a new encounter. I want to give you the opportunity now to spend some time in reflection. Just in a quiet moment in this room, I invite you to take out those connect cards and jot some thoughts down on the back side. How is God speaking to you today? What are some prayer requests that you need to bring back to Him and you feel like you're hitting the wall on, but you're going to still bring them to Him anyway because you're trusting His tenderness? Jot some thoughts down on those cards and let me pray for you. Thank you for listening to this message from Lafayette Community Church. We believe that God has a full and fulfilling life in store for you, and we want to help you live it. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me, Pastor Jeff, through the web form at LafayetteCommunityChurch.com. And as always, I encourage you to plug into a solid, God-honoring community wherever you may be. Life is a journey, and no one should ever walk alone.